Hey everybody, Matt Graham, MBS Live here with you on Friday, March 20th, 2020. Throughout the course of this video, I am going to be playing around on the new dashboard. There's an old dashboard, which is what we're all on right now, but the new dashboard is coming in the future. I'll be dinking around on that in the background as this video plays because for those of you that don't know, the way I record videos in order to keep them shorter and tighter is to record the audio first, and then I'll go back and record the screenshot portion so that I can focus completely on what I'm doing with the mouse and focus completely on what I'm doing in terms of the audio. So yeah, start to get excited about the next version. There's a lot of cool things coming, and I'll be playing with those throughout the video. Without further ado, let's talk about what's going on right now. Absolutely crazy day, absolutely crazy week. Yesterday was the most volatile day in the history of the secondary mortgage market as we know it. Today gave it a run for its money, but in a much more palatable way. Things started out unchanged and quickly began deteriorating for MBS. That was unpleasant to say the least, especially considering that yesterday the Fed unleashed new bond buying schedules, or a schedule for today that had them bringing an extra $32 billion to the table on top of 2.5 already, making today 3 times bigger than the biggest day in history, which was yesterday. Then by the end of the day, they came out with another surprise announcement. Maybe it's not so much of a surprise given that the first thing I said this morning was that by the end of the day, they're going to have to come out with another surprise announcement of $40 billion, in addition to what was already on the schedule for Monday. And for good measure, they threw in another $15 billion that they added to today. So it was, to say the very least, it was stunning. It was the most utterly and completely authoritative and violent and masterful and terrifying display of one huge player in the global financial market completely and utterly imposing its will and dominating whatever it wanted to impose its will on and dominate. Does this make the Fed bad or good? I don't know. It just makes them frickin' immense. And it lets us know, it reinforces this phrase of quote unquote, don't fight the Fed. And that's a phrase that's existed for a long time, and it typically has been viewed as something having to do with the Fed's forward guidance and the stock market, but during the QE era began to refer to QE and the implications thereof, although it really wasn't a perfect term at that time because QE had some counterintuitive movements involved. But today, in a time where especially the MBS market, but the bond market in general, desperately needed liquidity and really needs a big friend to show other people that it's going to be okay to buy. It was exactly as you'd expect. Don't fight the biggest buyer ever in the history of a day of the bond market. Because they're going to make prices go up and they're going to make yields go down. Oh, hey, by the way, at the same time, the Fed also unleashed $75 billion of bond buying in treasuries today. So yeah, it was a big day for them, and it needs to be. And the interesting thing here that we've been talking about is the Fed isn't doing all this bond buying because they want to juice rates lower. It's really the last thing on their mind. They're doing all this bond buying because everyone else is doing all this bond selling. We talked a lot more today about a more recent concept that's flared up, and it has to do with mortgage REITs. They are leveraged players in the MBS market, and one article from my friend Chris over at Bloomberg today suggested that the current thinking is that mortgage REITs are leveraged 7 to 10 times, and that they had about $300 billion in MBS at the end of 2019. So if they're merely deleveraging, right, for this oncoming financial cataclysm, if they're just deleveraging, I don't know what 7 times 3 is anymore, 21. So $210 billion? No, 300 billion, 210, 2.1 trillion, $2.1 trillion? It's a little bit hard to fathom. It did not compute in my brain. So yeah, they might have a lot of MBS to sell, and they may have been selling a lot of it recently. And Adam Quinones, our good friend at Refinitiv Icon and former partner in crime here at MBS Live, also mentioned that this was, likely a factor in a conversation with me yesterday. And so I think, we can definitely conclude that MREITs, mortgage REITs, are one of the players that have been fueling the selling frenzy. Although really everybody with an asset was trying to sell it at some point earlier this week because the market was moving to cash in anticipation of more uncertainty and more of that economic cataclysm I mentioned earlier. For the same reasons that you want to pull money out of your bank, apparently, or from what I'm hearing, or liquidate cash in your HELOCs, stockpile toilet paper, all the other things that we hope we don't need to do, but we do anyway to get ready for the zombie apocalypse. I'm not pulling cash out of my bank. I'm not getting a HELOC and pulling cash out of that. If you are, that's fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's something that people are doing because there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about what's going to happen and what's going to be the state of play in several months or a year from now in terms of, what the world looks like and what access to capital looks like and what credit looks like. So with that, I'm going to rant about a few things, and I'll make it real quick because the video will get too long otherwise. Is this 2008 and is there a credit crisis of any kind? No, there's not. It's not 2008, people. Please understand this. I said this yesterday. In 2008, there was toxicity in a sector that had a systemic connection to the rest of the financial system. And that had a domino effect or a potential domino effect that could have brought the whole thing down. And if you have ever watched the movie with, whatever his name is, playing Hank Paulson and the Billions guy, Giamatti, I don't remember, playing Bernanke, Hank Paulson's out on his lawn talking to his wife, and he's like, yeah, I could go to the grocery store tomorrow and there might not be any milk there. And that's the last time I'd ever see any milk. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I do remember feeling those feelings in 2008, watching everything unfold. I'd never been so glued to the monitor as I was then, and I would agree that it was that dire of a situation. Right now, I'm not really worried about that at all. The scariest thing about procuring food going forward has more to do with not wanting to shop around sick people. There's going to be plenty of food, especially with 30% of people being unemployed or however much it's going to be. Everybody that's hoarded is going to have their food and realize that they're throwing food away or not able to afford to hoard any more food. And the U.S. produces way, way more than we can use. And with 30% of people unemployed, if people get sick at some major farm or food producer, there's easy labor, plenty of people going to need a job. So I'm not worried about food. We got a lot of trees. I'm not worried about toilet paper. That'll come back. Get a bidet. That's not a high. I know some bidets are out of stock from what I've heard, but there's websites where you can find them. I digress. It's not 2008, okay? It's the bottom line. Could there be parts of it that are similar? Yes, but it's not a systemic mortgage crisis. We're not looking at bringing back the really horrible website ML Implode that was largely a tabloid. And we're not looking at a bunch of mortgage lenders going out of business. Maybe some will, maybe a few, I don't even know. But it's not like it was in 2008. It's not a culling of the mortgage industry. Some originators might decide this isn't the job for them. But, I think that with where rates are going to be and with how underwriting guidelines are going to be, given the adaptations that will need to be made, it's not going to be as difficult to do business in this environment. The big unknown there is what's going to happen with property values and with borrowers' will and desire to move forward with purchases and refis depending on what their situation is. And that will come up later in the video here as well, but it's not part of the rant right now. Potential recession, that's another rant I have. I've seen this on the news. Don't talk about a potential recession. There's no potential recession. It's a recession. It's already begun, even though it won't technically be a recession until September. The reason September matters is that is when Q2 GDP comes out, and that's the one that stands the best chance. Well, it's not when it comes out. That's when the final Q2 GDP comes out. It starts coming out in July, and then July, August, September are the 3 months that it is reported. The third month is the final GDP, and that's the one required to confirm that it is a recession. So September 2020, the recession is confirmed because we've had 2 months of negative growth, which is pretty much inevitable if Q1 is negative. And Q1 is expected to be negative, according to most people. I don't know how to forecast that stuff, but gosh, it wouldn't surprise me. So that's when the recession is confirmed, September 2020. It's not just going to be a recession like, by the skin of its teeth. It's going to be massive. The White House called state unemployment offices and asked them not to report unemployment next week. The reason is they don't want to freak out the American public. Democrat, Republican, I don't care who you are. I think that's actually probably a good idea right now. Some people might say, oh, Trump's trying to manipulate the thing. No. I think that a Democrat or a Republican would be well advised to make that same phone call, because nobody wants to see jobless claims go from 210,000 last week to 280,000 this week to 1.5 million next week, because that could be the number that we would see. And there are credible researchers that have compiled that just based on news that's already been reported in the media and large company layoffs. That's the scale of the issue that we're dealing with here. And that would be, to put it mildly, it would crush any previous single week jump in jobless claims. And it would freak a lot of people out. It'd be a wake-up call for a lot of investors that aren't paying enough attention to the gravity of the oncoming recession. Will it be a depression, quote unquote? I don't know. I don't even know what the difference between a recession and a depression is. It's like a qualitative thing, I think. And if it's not a qualitative thing, if there's some objective way to measure the difference, let me know. But from what I've read, it's a sustained period, right? Instead of just the minimum 2 quarters. Doesn't matter. It's big and nasty. As to how big and how nasty it will be, that depends on how the fight evolves against coronavirus. Lots of opinions, lots of emotion out there. People are very emotional, and just understand that. Cut people some slack. Don't jump down people's throats if they have a drastically different opinion from you. Let's come together, let's educate, let's uplift. But if somebody tells you, well, China beat this and they have no new cases reported last week, great. A, how are you going to confirm that? B, what did it take for them to do that? To this day, despite the extreme measures that some of us are seeing in our own cities, from what I understand, from what I can research, and based on the information that makes it to us from China, the measures that they took are continually described as quote unquote draconian. And it was a full scale quarantine of Wuhan where a lot of extra people died that didn't have to in order to cordon off that part of China. And that did a lot to prevent the spread of coronavirus in China. Was it the right call from a social standpoint? Not for me to say. Some of us here think that we should let the thing run its course, let the medical system get overwhelmed, and then everything that's negative about this would be over sooner. That's not going to happen in the U.S. We're not going to go that route for humanitarian reasons or for ethical reasons. And so it's pointless to consider it. This is going to last longer here than it did in China for that reason. And case studies like Italy and South Korea are informative. South Korea is informative because they're doing a way better job of managing this than us in terms of how rapidly they tested a percentage of their population. We'd have to be testing at 5 times the rate we are right now to catch up with them. And that may happen eventually, but it hasn't happened yet. Notably, the more we test, the more the numbers go up and the more people are going to freak out. So yeah, China beat this. Maybe it might have a resurgence there. We're not going to beat it the way they did. It's going to kill a lot of people. I don't know how many people it's going to kill, but it's going to kill a lot of people. And this dovetails into the second rant when people talk about, well, the flu kills such and such number of people. Yes, it does. And wouldn't it be horrible if another flu came along that we didn't have a vaccine for that killed just as many, if not more people in the US? Because that's what coronavirus is going to do, even if we manage it very well, most likely. Based on the numbers that are out right now, it's more contagious and more deadly. So do the math. There's no vaccine for it. Don't be one of those people that buries your head in the sand just because you don't want to feel the scary, bad feelings. And if you don't like what I'm saying, and that gives you a feeling about MBS Live or about me as an analyst, that's not something that's going to be a topic of conversation on an ongoing basis. But I want to bring these things to the forefront because they're important to consider from an economic standpoint and from a market standpoint, because the people that are trading money are the ones that are looking at the points that I'm bringing up to you right now. And I know most of you agree with me, but a few of you don't and are in that camp of, oh, this is overblown, rub some dirt on it and get back out there. That's cool if you think that, but you're probably wrong and everyone else is probably right. And regardless of who's wrong and right, this is the way markets are progressively trading this thing. So be aware of that. And then you can interact with the financial market and the mortgage market in a more informed way. Chloroquine, or however that's said, and all these antiviral cocktail headlines that came up this week. Another real huge pet peeve of mine. This was a drug used to fight malaria, and it was used to fight SARS in 2003. And all of a sudden, there were headlines that were touting it as something that could combat coronavirus, COVID-19. Use your brains, people, please. When you hear news like this and when people tell you things like this, use your brains. It's important that we keep a level head here. Think about it. The virus, the disease that it causes right now is scientifically labeled SARS-CoV-2. It's the second coming of SARS in a much nastier way. Do you think that a medication that was used to treat SARS-1 would not have been tried with SARS too early in the process or suggested? I'll leave it at that. That's not going to stop this. Medications in general, the antivirals, anything that ends with a VIR is an antiviral. Tamiflu's underlying ingredient, I don't know how to say it, starts with an O, ends with a VIR. That's what you get if you have the flu and detect it early enough, and it can stop the replication of the flu virus in your body if you've caught it early enough in the process. Same story with COVID. If you take a bunch of antivirals early enough in the detection process, it will stop the replication of the virus or slow it down, and it increases your chances to survive. That's a fact. That's great. I hope we can catch them fast enough to get these antivirals in people to keep people from dying. But it doesn't stop the spread of the disease. It doesn't stop the medical system from being overwhelmed if too many people get it at once. So these headlines about drugs give people hope, but they're not cure-alls, not panaceas. I think that's it as far as rants that I had. But when this, tidal wave of jobless claims hits and all of this cash hoarding and panic and toilet paper grabbing and everything else, we are already starting to see loans being pulled out, canceled, buyers canceling, refi candidates unable to complete their refis because they can't get a VOE. That does dovetail into another question that's come up, which is about credit quality for MBS. And I just want everybody to remember that an investor isn't looking at credit quality as a determining factor in whether or not they're going to get their money back, because getting their money back is a factor of GSEs and Fannie and Freddie guaranteeing timely repayment of principal and interest. And some folks mentioned that they only guarantee that for 90 days. And while that may be true as far as the monthly payments, the servicer is still on the hook to make sure the bondholder gets all their interest back that they were entitled to, even if they're only getting monthly payments through the first 90 days. If you know better than I do on that, let me know and correct me if I'm wrong, but my research would suggest that. So investors aren't worried about being repaid. What they might be worried about is two things. Number one, a material effect on prepayment rates because of this stuff, and also maybe a lack of supply, which is a really crazy thing considering there's been so much supply, is the first thing I talked about in the video. So with the Fed completely juicing the demand side of the equation, are we now seeing the potential for an overcorrection where supply is going to drop off because there aren't as many new loans being originated because people are backing out or unable to qualify? And just to wrap up that credit quality thing, by the time a loan is originated and the VOE is done, then we're not dealing with credit quality issues anymore from somebody that's losing their job unless they did the loan before they lost their job, in which case, yes, that could lead an investor to conclude, oh man, MBS that were just recently originated are going to have even faster prepayments because people are going to default on their loans and then they're going to pay them off earlier because of the foreclosure, and that extra prepayment speed is what actually bothers investors. But there again, the forbearance programs are already rolled out, and anyone that is able to get a job again after losing the one they just lost should be able to keep their loan. So don't let it's like a spider web of considerations change what you do or what you believe about financial markets or where rates will go. Rates are going to go where they're going to go based on the economy and inflation and the Fed. And today, more than any other day since September 2012, the Fed has resoundingly confirmed it has the bond markets back and the mortgage markets back, and it's not going to let illiquidity stand in the way of buyers and sellers doing what they need to do. This, from a lock float standpoint, very likely means that next week will be better than this week. I would really hesitate to take anybody's advice when it comes to what's going to happen in the future right now. But the size of the reprices that we're seeing this afternoon, the fact that they are just as big as the gains we're seeing in MBS, which is, I think, the first time since coronavirus volatility began that lenders are actually repricing as much as a movement in MBS suggests they should. I think that really speaks to the fact that lenders are seeing one of two things. Either they are fully reassured that the Fed has their back, or they can see that the supply side of the equation has fully dried up, that the Fed's massive buying announcements and existing buying that already took place today have fully mopped up all of the excess selling demand or the excess oversupply, that's a double excess really, that existed due to M-REITs or whoever else was trying to get a hold of cash heading into this. So if the supply is drying up and the Fed is still going to be buying, and they are, then it's hard for MBS to do anything but improve. And the only other thing that's required there is for the basis, the Treasury benchmark, to remain in a reasonably stable range. And I think as long as it's, a 10-year yield is under 1.17, we're in a range where mortgage rates can hang out around all-time lows or make new all-time lows. As of last week, it was a situation where any major improvement in MBS prices would mean that we could get back toward all-time lows in a matter of days to weeks. As of yesterday, I was saying weeks to months. As of today, we're probably, honing in on that warm bowl of porridge of weeks. And that could be as little as 1 week. So we could be back next week, best case scenario. Or, it could be 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how things go. I think that's your range, though, probably 1 to 3 weeks to get back to all-time lows or below. And if unexpected challenges arise to that, could take a bit longer. If unexpected benefits happen, if things are, better than I foresee, could frickin' be Monday morning. That's the market that we're in right now. You could talk to anybody about what they think is going to happen, and the smartest person in the room might be wrong. And I'm not saying that's me. I'm just a person in the room. But either way, I'm not worried about mortgage rates going higher and higher and never coming back here anytime too soon. Does that mean I shouldn't be worried? I don't know. But I'm personally not worried. So to whatever extent that reassures you, there you go. The caveat is this, though, is that this is the most volatile 2 weeks we've ever seen in the secondary mortgage market. So you don't want to take anything for granted, even if you want to hold out hope that things are going to improve significantly tomorrow. I wouldn't call up your clients and say, I guarantee you can get lower rates next. No, you can't guarantee that. I'm just saying it's something to hold out hope for and to be a little bit more hopeful going into your weekend. Hug your family, help your neighbors that need help, and have a little optimism about where rates might end up next week, because I have a lot more optimism about that this afternoon than I did this morning when the mortgage market was convulsing. I'm going to cut it short there, guys. That's a series of incredibly long videos this week. And if you've been listening all the way to the end, the code word is banana. Mention that to me in a chat or an email and I'll give you a gold star. No, just kidding. But that is the code word. Long videos. And if you've been listening all the way, I appreciate it. Again, for you new people, this isn't the normal length of an MBS live video. It is extremely long. Normal video is 5 to 6 minutes, and we'll get back there. But gosh, there's a lot going on right now. Crazy times. That's going to do it for this week. Hope everybody has a healthy weekend, and I'll be back with you guys on Monday.